Mister, are you the boss of everybody? The little girl's voice barely pierced the heavy Chicago rain, but it stopped the city's most dangerous man dead in his tracks. Trembling, she held up a crumpled medical bill. My mummy is sick, and her boss won't pay her. The rain in Chicago had a way of washing away the city's superficial glamour, leaving behind only the cold, hard steel of its reality. Lucien Russo preferred it this way. At 34, Lucien was the head of the Russo Syndicate, a sprawling empire built on logistics, import-export, and a highly efficient, deeply feared underground network. He was a man composed of sharp angles, tailored Italian wool, and a chillingly calm demeanor that commanded absolute obedience. It was near midnight on a Tuesday. Lucien had just stepped out of a private dining room at the Onyx, a high-end steakhouse he technically owned through 3 layers of shell corporations. Flanked by his right-hand man, Silas, and 2 heavy-set enforcers, Lucien paused under the restaurant's massive black awning to light a cigarette. That was when the perimeter broke. "Hey, get back here!" One of the street-level lookouts barked, his heavy boots splashing against the wet pavement. Lucien's eyes flicked to the left. Darting through the heavy curtain of rain, slipping effortlessly between the massive frames of the security detail, was a child. Silas immediately reached inside his jacket, his instincts trained for ambushes, but Lucien raised a single, leather-gloved hand. The gesture was absolute. Silas froze. The figure came to a halt just 3 feet from Lucien. It was a little girl, no older than 7. She was drowning in a faded yellow raincoat that was at least 2 sizes too big, the sleeves rolled up to her elbows. Her dark hair was plastered to her pale cheeks, and her teeth were chattering violently. Yet, when she looked up at Lucien, her wide hazel eyes held no fear, only a desperate, singular focus. "Mister," she said, her voice shaking but surprisingly loud over the hum of the idling SUVs. "Are you the boss of everybody?" Silas let out a low, rough exhale that might have been a laugh under different circumstances. "Kid, you need to go home. Where are your parents?" The girl ignored Silas completely, her gaze locked onto Lucien. She stepped closer, invading the personal space of a man whom grown, hardened criminals wouldn't dare approach without an invitation. The man at the bakery told the man at the butcher shop that Lucien Russo is the boss of everybody in this city, the little girl stated, her logic unassailable in its childhood simplicity. He said, "You make people do what they are supposed to do." Lucien took a slow drag from his cigarette, the glowing cherry illuminating the sharp planes of his face. He looked down at her. "People say a lot of things. What's your name?" "Lily," she said. She reached into the deep pocket of her raincoat and pulled out a piece of paper that had been folded and refolded so many times it was practically falling apart at the creases. She held it out to him. "My mummy is sick. Really, really sick. And her boss won't pay her. She cries when she thinks I'm asleep." Lucien didn't move to take the paper right away. He stared at the girl. In his world, people came to him for favors, for loans, for hits, and for protection. They offered him percentages, loyalties, and blood. This child was offering him a crumpled piece of paper and a terrifying amount of trust. Slowly, Lucien took the paper. It was a final notice from a local hospital detailing a balance of over $12,000 for emergency treatment of severe septicemia. Attached to it with a rusty paperclip was a pay stub from a company called Sterling Prestige Catering, showing $0 deposited for the last 3 pay cycles. The name on the hospital bill was Celine Jenkins. "Sterling Prestige," Silas murmured, peering over Lucien's shoulder. "Arthur Pendleton's outfit. The guy's a bottom feeder. Runs high-end catering for corporate gigs, but hires desperate people under the table to clean up the messes. Pays them pennies, if he pays them at all." Lucien folded the paper and slipped it into the inside pocket of his suit jacket. "Why isn't she working, Lily?" "The doctor said her kidneys are bad because she got an infection," Lily explained, her voice finally cracking, a single tear mixing with the rain on her cheek. "She needs medicine, but the pharmacy said we have to pay first. Mr. Pendleton owes Mommy $3,000. I went to his office today after school, but his guards chased me away. They called me a rat." A dangerous, suffocating silence descended on the sidewalk. Silas shifted his weight, recognizing the subtle tightening of Lucien's jaw. It was a micro-expression that usually preceded a very violent shift in the city's power dynamic. Lucien knelt, ignoring the wet pavement soaking into his $1,000 trousers. He looked Lily directly in the eye, bringing himself down to her level. "Where is your mother now?" "Home," In bed. She can't stand up today. Give my friend Silas your address, Lucien said, his voice dropping to a low, smooth baritone that was surprisingly gentle. You're going to get in the car with him. He's going to buy you whatever you want to eat, and then he's going to take you home. Lily hesitated, clutching the oversized edges of her raincoat. Are you going to make Mr. Pendleton pay my mummy? I am going to have a conversation with Mr. Pendleton, Lucien replied, standing back up, his towering silhouette blocking out the streetlights. Silas, get her a hot meal and get her home safe. Have Leo stay at their door. Nobody goes in or out. And you, boss? Silas asked, already ushering the shivering child toward the warm, leather-lined interior of the SUV. Lucien turned toward the second vehicle. The rain seemed to slicken his dark hair, highlighting the cold, predatory gleam in his dark eyes. I'm going to make a late-night withdrawal. As the SUV pulled away, Lucien got into the back seat of his own car. He pulled the crumpled papers from his pocket and smoothed them out on his knee. Selene Jenkins. The address listed was in the Lower West Side, a neighborhood known for crumbling brick walk-ups and forgotten people. Lucien didn't know this woman. He owed her nothing. But the sight of that little girl, standing brave in the freezing rain to fight for her mother, had struck a deeply buried nerve. It reminded him of a time before the suits and the power, a time when he was just a helpless kid watching his own mother work herself into an early grave while men in power looked the other way. Arthur Pendleton was about to learn a very painful lesson about the shifting scales of justice in Chicago. Arthur Pendleton's office was located in a converted warehouse in the Fulton Market district. Even at 1 a.m, the lights were on. Pendleton was a man who thrived in the shadows of the elite, catering to the wealthy while exploiting the invisible hands that polished their silver and scrubbed their floors. The heavy glass door of the warehouse shattered inward with a deafening crash, completely bypassing the need for a lockpick. Pendleton, a portly man with a flushed face and a cheap comb-over, leaped up from behind his mahogany desk, dropping the ledger he had been reviewing. 2 of his private security guards, beefy men hired more for their intimidation factor than actual skill, rushed into the room from the hallway. They didn't make it far. Lucien's enforcers, 2 silent shadows who had followed him into the building, dispatched them with a brutal, terrifying efficiency. There were no gunshots, just the sickening thud of fists against bone and the heavy thumps of bodies hitting the hardwood floor. Within 10 seconds, the room was dead silent again, save for the sound of Pendleton's ragged, panicked breathing. Lucien stepped over one of the unconscious guards and walked slowly toward the desk. He didn't look angry. In fact, he looked incredibly bored, which only made him infinitely more terrifying. Who the hell are you? Pendleton stammered, his hand instinctively dropping toward the drawer where he kept a licensed firearm. I wouldn't, Lucien advised softly. He didn't raise his voice, but the command echoed in the large room. Pendleton's hand froze. Lucien reached the desk, picked up a heavy, crystal Scotch glass, and examined it in the dim light. You have a payroll issue, Arthur. I'm here from HR to resolve it. Pendleton swallowed hard, finally recognizing the face from the whispered warnings that circulated through the city's underbelly. Mr. Russo. I don't understand. We don't do business. I pay my dues to the union. I stay out of your territory. Selene Jenkins, Lucien said, setting the glass down with a sharp clack. You owe her $3,000 in back pay. You fired her when she got sick. And today, your men chased her 7-year-old daughter out of the rain and called her a rat. Pendleton stared, utterly bewildered. The infamous Lucien Russo, the man who allegedly orchestrated the hostile takeover of the entire harbour docks last year, was standing in his office over a cleaning woman's missing wages. Jenkins? Pendleton scoffed nervously, trying to find his footing. Look, Mr. Russo, there's a misunderstanding. The woman is an independent contractor. She didn't fulfill her hours. I run a tight business here. I can't just hand out charity to every sick. Lucien's hand lashed out with viper-like speed. He grabbed Pendleton by the knot of his expensive silk tie and slammed him face first into the mahogany desk. The sound of Pendleton's nose breaking cracked like a whip through the room. Pendleton shrieked, his hands flying to his bleeding face as Lucien yanked him back up by his collar, pulling him halfway across the desk. I wasn't asking for a summary of your business practices, Lucien whispered, his face inches from Pendleton's. The coldness in his eyes was absolute. I am telling you that you owe Selene Jenkins. And because you forced a little girl to stand in the freezing rain to do a man's job, your late fees have accrued significantly. Lucien let go of the tie, letting Pendleton collapse back into his leather chair, sobbing and holding his bloody face. Open the safe, Arthur. I don't have cash like that on hand, Pendleton wept. Lucien simply stared. 10 seconds later, Pendleton was frantically spinning the dial on a wall safe hidden behind a framed painting of sailboats. He pulled out thick stacks of banded $100 bills. 30,000, Lucien stated, not asking a question. 3,000 for her wages. The rest is for her medical bills and pain and suffering. If I ever hear your name in the same sentence as the Jenkins family again, I won't send my men through the front door. I'll just burn this warehouse to the ground with you inside it. Do we understand each other? Yes, God, yes, Pendleton sputtered, shoving the cash into a canvas deposit bag. Lucien took the bag, turned on his heel, and walked out of the office, stepping over the groaning guards without a downward glance. 40 minutes later, Lucien's SUV pulled up to a decaying brick apartment building on the Lower West Side. Leo was standing under the flickering amber streetlight by the entrance, smoking a cigarette. He nodded as Lucien approached. 4th floor, boss. Apartment 4B. Silas brought the kid back with 2 bags of groceries and a pizza an hour ago. He's waiting upstairs. Lucien climbed the narrow, dimly lit stairs. The air smelled of boiled cabbage and damp wood. When he reached the 4th floor, the door to 4B was slightly ajar, with Silas standing watch in the hallway. Silas pushed the door open, allowing Lucien to enter. The apartment was painfully small. The living room doubled as a kitchen, and a single door led to what was likely the only bedroom. Lily was sitting cross-legged on a worn-out sofa, eating a slice of pizza. When she saw Lucien, her face lit up. "You came back," she whispered, excitedly. Lucien offered her a rare, faint smile. "I told you I would." From the bedroom, a woman's voice called out, weak and raw, punctuated by a wet, agonizing cough. "Lily? Who's out there? Honey, come here." Lucien walked toward the bedroom door. The room was illuminated only by a small bedside lamp. Lying in a narrow bed beneath a pile of mismatched blankets was Celine Jenkins. Even pale, sweating with fever, and hollowed out by exhaustion, she was strikingly beautiful. She had the same dark hair as her daughter, but her eyes were a piercing, stormy grey. When she saw Lucien, a towering man in a bespoke, rain-dampened suit, standing in her doorway, panic instantly flooded her features. She tried to sit up, her breathing shallow and raspy. "Who are you? Where is my daughter?" she demanded, a fierce, maternal protectiveness overriding her physical weakness. "Your daughter is safe in the living room," Lucien said softly, stepping fully into the room but keeping a respectful distance. He held up his hands to show he wasn't a threat. "My name is Lucien Rousseau. Lily came to find me tonight." Celine's eyes widened, darting from his expensive suit to the hard, unyielding lines of his face. She knew the name. Anyone who lived in Chicago long enough knew the name Rousseau. Why? Why would she do that? We don't have anything. We don't want any trouble? She didn't bring trouble, Miss Jenkins. She brought a collection notice. Lucien walked to the small wooden nightstand and placed the heavy canvas bag on it. He unzipped it, revealing the thick stacks of cash. "Arthur Pendleton sends his deepest apologies for the delay in your payroll. This covers your back pay, your hospital bills, and enough to keep you comfortable while you recover." Celine stared at the money, the sheer volume of it incomprehensible. For a moment, relief washed over her face, the crushing weight of starvation and eviction momentarily lifted. But then, as quickly as the relief came, it was replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated terror. She looked from the money to Lucien, her hands trembling violently as she clutched the blanket to her chest. "No," she whispered, her voice breaking into a harsh cough. "No, you don't understand." Lucien frowned, his protective instincts, newly awakened, going on high alert. "It's yours. He won't bother you again." "You don't understand what you've done," Celine rasped, tears spilling down her flushed cheeks. She locked her grey eyes onto his, and Lucien saw a fear deeper than any debt collector could inspire. "Pendleton wasn't just withholding my pay because he's cheap," she confessed, her voice dropping to a terrified whisper. "He was punishing me. He was starving me out so I'd keep my mouth shut. I was cleaning the loading dock after the mayor's gala 3 weeks ago. I wasn't supposed to be there. I saw what they were loading into the back of the Sterling Prestige catering vans." Lucien's posture stiffened, the air in the room suddenly turning to ice. "What did you see, Celine?" She swallowed hard, her chest heaving. "It wasn't food, Mr. Rousseau. It was crates of automatic weapons. Pendleton isn't just a caterer. He's running guns. And the men directing the vans..." I recognized one of them from the news. It was Vincenzo Calabrese. Lucien went completely still. The Calabrese family was his biggest rival, a vicious faction vying for control of the city's western territory. By shaking down Pendleton, Lucien hadn't just settled a labor dispute. He had unknowingly kicked a hornet's nest, alerting the Calabrese cartel that he was poking around their secret distribution network. And Celine, the sick, desperate mother who just wanted to feed her child, was the only living witness. Lucien looked back at the canvas bag of cash, then down at the terrified woman trembling in the bed. He had walked into this dilapidated apartment to play the savior for a little girl. Instead, he had just walked right into the opening shots of a mob war. "Get your things," Lucien said, his voice dropping to a lethal, commanding octave. He turned toward the living room. "Silas, pack whatever they need. We're moving them to the safe house. Now." The chaotic urgency of the evacuation blurred into a high-speed convoy cutting through the flooded Chicago streets. Selene barely remembered the descent from her apartment. Her legs had given out on the second-floor landing, her fever spiking dangerously, leaving her vision swimming with dark spots. Without a word, Lucien had scooped her into his arms, his tailored suit completely indifferent to the damp, cheap fabric of her pajamas. He carried her with an effortless strength that terrified her just as much as it comforted her. Now, she drifted in and out of consciousness in the back of an armored SUV, her head resting against the cool leather. Lily was asleep, curled up in Silas's massive coat on the opposite seat. "We're taking them to the Lake Forest estate," Lucien ordered, his voice cutting through the hum of the engine. He was on the phone, his tone clipped and lethal. "Call Dr. Harrison Cole. Tell him to bring a full trauma kit, broad-spectrum IV antibiotics, and whatever he needs for advanced sepsis. If he argues about the time, remind him who funded his clinic." Selene weakly turned her head toward him. In the passing glow of the streetlights, Lucien's profile was carved from granite. He was a man accustomed to giving orders and having the world bend to his will. Yet, he had upended his entire night and potentially his empire for a cleaning woman and her child. "Mr. Russo." She, rasped her throat, feeling like crushed glass. Lucien ended the call and looked down at her. The coldness in his eyes softened, replaced by a guarded intensity. "Save your strength, Celine. You're burning up." "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. "If Vincenzo Calabrese is moving guns, he'll kill you for taking me. He'll kill Lily." "Vincenzo Calabrese couldn't touch you if he had an army," Lucien said evenly, though the absolute certainty in his voice sent a shiver down her spine. "I run this city, Selene, not Vincenzo. Tonight, you and your daughter are under the protection of the Russo family. That means you are untouchable." They arrived at a sprawling, secluded estate hidden behind 10-foot wrought iron gates and a thick perimeter of ancient oak trees. The safe house was less of a house and more of a fortress, equipped with biometric locks, reinforced glass, and a dozen heavily armed men patrolling the grounds. Dr. Harrison Cole, an older, discreet physician with a pragmatic demeanor, was waiting in the grand foyer. Within minutes, Celine was placed in a luxurious guest suite. The silk sheets and mahogany furniture felt entirely alien to her. Dr. Cole worked efficiently, hooking her up to an IV and administering a heavy dose of antibiotics and fluids. "She's dangerously close to renal failure from the infection," Dr. Cole murmured to Lucien near the doorway, keeping his voice low. "Another 24 hours in that damp apartment without medication. And this would have been a recovery mission, not a rescue. She needs absolute rest." "Make sure she gets it," Lucien replied, watching Selene's chest rise and fall rhythmically as the medication finally pulled her into a deep, healing sleep. For the next 2 days, the Lake Forest estate became a surreal bubble of tranquility amidst an impending war. Selene's fever broke on the second morning. When she finally opened her eyes with clarity, the crushing weight of her illness had receded, leaving behind a profound exhaustion. The bedroom door clicked open, and Lucien stepped inside. He had traded his formal suits for a dark, fitted Henley and slacks, looking less like a boardroom executive and more like the dangerous street soldier he had once been. He carried a silver tray holding a bowl of hot soup and a glass of water. "You're awake," he noted, setting the tray on the nightstand. Celine pulled herself up against the plush pillows, suddenly acutely aware of her tangled hair and pale skin. "Where is Lily?" "In the kitchen. She's currently trying to teach Leo how to make a friendship bracelet," Lucien said, a faint, genuine smirk touching his lips. "He's terrified of doing it wrong." Selene let out a breathless, weak laugh. tears pricking her eyes. Thank you for everything. The medicine, the food, for keeping her safe. Lucien pulled up a chair beside the bed. Eat. You need your strength. We have a problem, Celine. Celine's spoon froze halfway to her mouth. The illusion of safety shattered instantly. Calabrese? My men did a sweep of Pendleton's warehouse this morning. Or what was left of it, Lucien explained, his voice grim. It was burned to the ground overnight. 2 bodies were found inside. Arthur Pendleton and his head of security, both shot in the back of the head before the fire started. Selene gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Pendleton was a greedy, cruel man, but the reality of his murder was a stark reminder of the world she had accidentally stumbled into. Calabrese's cleaning house, Lucien continued, his dark eyes locking onto hers. Pendleton was weak. When Vincenzo found out someone hit the warehouse, he likely interrogated Pendleton before killing him. Pendleton would have squealed to save his own skin. He would have told them exactly why I was there. He told them about me, Selene whispered, terror closing around her throat. He told them you saw the guns, Lucien corrected. Which means Vincenzo Calabrese now knows there is a civilian witness who can place him at the center of a federal gun trafficking ring. And he knows I have you. The air in the estate's makeshift war room was thick with cigar smoke and tension. It was a massive, wood-paneled library that Lucien had converted into his command center. Maps of Chicago's territories were spread across the billiard table, weighed down by half-empty tumblers of whiskey. Lucien stood at the head of the table, his posture rigid. Silas stood to his right, while Matteo, a seasoned capo who managed the Russo family's southern territories, paced the floor like a caged pit bull. It's a liability, Dom, Matteo argued, slamming a heavy hand onto the mahogany table. We are going to war over a cleaning lady? Vincenzo just drove a heavily armored truck through the front doors of the Onyx. 3 of our guys are in the hospital. He left a message spray-painted on the bar. Give us the rat or the city burns. Lucien didn't blink. The Onyx is insured. The men will be compensated. We hold the line. Hold the line? Matteo scoffed, his face flushed with anger. She's not blood, Lucien. She's a nobody who was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Hand her over to Vincenzo. It's the cost of doing business. You want to risk the whole syndicate for some bleeding heart charity case? The room went dead silent. Silas subtly stepped back, recognizing the sudden, terrifying stillness that overtook Lucien. Lucien moved so fast it was a blur. He crossed the distance between him and Matteo, grabbing the capo by the throat and slamming him against the bookshelves. Hardcover volumes rained down around them. Lucien's forearm pressed crushing weight against Matteo's windpipe. Let me make something perfectly clear to you, Matteo. Lucien hissed, his voice dropping to a demonic whisper. Selene Jenkins is under my roof. She is under my protection. If you ever suggest handing a mother and a 7-year-old child over to a butcher like Vincenzo Calabrese again, I will cut out your tongue and feed it to you. Do you understand my business model now? Matteo choked, his face turning a mottled purple, and tapped frantically on Lucien's arm. Lucien released him, letting the gasping capo slide to the floor. Double the guards on the perimeter, Lucien ordered Silas, straightening his cuffs as if nothing had happened, and find out how Vincenzo knew where to hit. Pendleton knew I took Selene, but he didn't know about the Onyx. Someone in our organization pointed Vincenzo in the right direction. You think we have a mole? Silas asked, his jaw tightening. I know we do, Lucien said, his eyes narrowing, and I'm going to smoke them out. Later that evening, the storm outside returned, violently lashing rain against the tall windows of the estate. Selene was sitting in the library's window seat, wrapped in a thick cashmere blanket. She had insisted on leaving the bedroom, feeling too confined by the 4 walls. She watched the lightning illuminate the heavily armed men patrolling the dark gardens. You shouldn't be out of bed, a deep voice rumbled from the doorway. Selene turned to see Lucien stepping into the dim library. He looked exhausted, the sharp angles of his face cast in heavy shadows. I couldn't sleep, Selene admitted softly. She looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the blood on his knuckles, a remnant from his earlier altercation with Matteo that he hadn't fully washed off. They attacked your restaurant today. I saw it on the news in the bedroom. They're coming after you because of me. Lucien walked over and sat on the opposite end of the window seat. He poured 2 fingers of amber liquid from a crystal decanter on a nearby side table but didn't drink it. He just stared at the glass. They're coming after me because Vincenzo and I have been waiting for an excuse to kill each other for 5 years, Lucien corrected her. You are just the match that lit the powder keg. Matteo thinks you should give me to them, Selene said, her voice trembling slightly. She had overheard the shouting earlier. Maybe he's right, Lucien. I can't let your men die for me. I can't let Lily get caught in the crossfire. If I turn myself in to the police are on Vincenzo's payroll, Lucien interrupted harshly, his eyes snapping to hers. The intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. If you walk into a precinct, you will be dead before you reach a holding cell, and Lily will be left an orphan. Selene choked back a sob, burying her face in her hands. The sheer magnitude of the nightmare was suffocating. I just wanted to get paid. I just wanted to buy her medicine. Lucien set the glass down. He reached out, his large, scarred hands gently pulling hers away from her face. His touch was incredibly warm, a stark contrast to the coldness of his reputation. He didn't let go of her hands. Look at me, Selene, he commanded softly. She looked up, her grey eyes swimming with tears, meeting his dark, unwavering stare. When Lily walked up to me in the rain, she wasn't afraid, Lucien said, his thumb lightly brushing the back of her trembling hand. She believed, with absolute certainty, that I could fix it. I intend to prove her right. I protect what is mine, and right now, you and your daughter are mine to protect. Nobody touches you. Not Vincenzo, not my men, nobody. The air between them shifted, charged with something heavy and undeniable. It wasn't just a promise of survival, it was a vow. In his eyes, Selene didn't see a ruthless mafia boss. She saw a man who had built walls of violence to survive a brutal world, and for the first time, he was opening the gates for someone else. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors of the library burst open. Silas stood in the doorway, drenched in rain, an assault rifle slung across his chest. His face was pale. Lucien, Silas breathed heavily. The perimeter alarms just tripped on the south gate. The cameras are down. We've got heavily armed vehicles breaching the tree line. Lucien stood up instantly, his demeanor shifting from vulnerable protector to apex predator in a fraction of a second. He pulled a sleek, black firearm from the holster beneath his jacket. Vincenzo is here, Lucien said, his voice cold as ice. He turned to Selene. Get to the panic room behind the wine cellar. Take Lily. Lock the door and do not open it for anyone but me. Lucien Selene started, panic seizing her chest. Go! He roared. As Selene ran toward the hallway, the first deafening explosion rocked the estate, shattering the library windows and plunging the mansion into utter darkness. The explosion blew the heavy library doors completely off their hinges, sending a shockwave of heat and splintered wood through the air. Selene didn't look back. Running on pure, terrifying adrenaline, she sprinted down the grand hallway, her bare feet slipping on the polished hardwood. The emergency backup lights flickered to life, casting the estate in a dizzying, blood-red glow. Lily! Selene screamed, bursting into the kitchen. Leo was already moving, scooping the terrified 7-year-old into his massive arms. I've got her! Miss Jenkins! Move! To the cellar! The sound of automatic gunfire erupted from the front courtyard, a deafening, rhythmic tearing that vibrated through the floorboards. Vincenzo Calabrese had not sent a warning, he had sent a small army. Selene and Leo descended the stone spiral staircase into the cavernous wine cellar. The air grew instantly cold, smelling of damp earth and aged cork. At the far end of the cellar, hidden behind a false wall of vintage Bordeaux, was the reinforced steel door of the panic room. Leo set Lily down and punched a 6-digit code into the keypad beside the door. The heavy hydraulic locks hissed, disengaging with a loud clack. Get in, Leo ordered, pulling his sidearm. I'll hold the stairs. Don't open this door for anyone except the boss. Leo, please come inside with us, Selene begged, pulling a crying Lily against her chest. I have my orders, ma'am, he replied, offering a tight, grim smile. Before Leo could turn back to the stairs, a suppressed gunshot sliced through the damp air. Pfft, Leo's eyes widened in shock. He slumped forward, his weapon clattering uselessly against the stone floor, a dark pool of crimson spreading rapidly across the back of his jacket. Selene screamed, shoving Lily behind her into the open doorway of the panic room. She grabbed a heavy wine bottle from the nearest rack, her hands shaking violently as a figure stepped out from the shadows of the staircase. It wasn't one of Vincenzo's heavily armed mercenaries. It was Matteo. The capo stepped over Leo's lifeless body, his customized pistol raised and leveled directly at Selene's chest. The red emergency lights cast deep, sinister shadows across his scarred face. I told Lucien you were a liability, Matteo sneered. his voice echoing in the underground chamber. But he wouldn't listen. He's gone soft. A man who thinks with his heart has no business running Chicago. You, Celine, breathed, the horrifying realization dawning on her. You're the mole. You told Vincenzo where we were. Vincenzo promised me the southern and western territories once Lucien is out of the picture, Matteo said smoothly, taking a slow step closer. All I had to do was lower the perimeter defenses, unlock the south gate, and hand over the rat. You see, Celine, this is just business, nothing personal. Don't touch my mummy! Lily shrieked from the threshold of the panic room, her small fists clenched. Matteo laughed a cold, humorless sound. Grab the kid, Selene. Vincenzo wants you both. If you make a scene, I'll just shoot you in the legs and drag you out. Celine gripped the wine bottle tighter, her knuckles turning white. She shifted her weight, preparing to throw herself at Matteo, fully aware that she would likely die before she crossed half the distance. I have to give Lily time to close the door. You're not taking us anywhere, Matteo. The voice came from the darkest corner of the cellar, a deep, lethal baritone that seemed to freeze the very air in the room. Matteo spun around, wildly aiming his pistol into the gloom, but he was too slow. Lucien stepped out from behind a towering rack of wine. He didn't look like a man fighting a losing battle. He looked like the Grim Reaper incarnate. His suit jacket was gone, his white shirt stained with soot, and in his right hand, he held a massive, matte black, heavy-caliber handgun. How? Matteo stammered, taking a panicked step backward. You were supposed to be at the front gates. Vincenzo has 50 men out there. Vincenzo had 50 men out there, Lucien corrected, his voice dangerously calm. He continued walking forward, his gaze locked onto the traitor. Did you really think I didn't know you were the rat, Matteo? You've been skimming from the southern docks for a year. I just needed to know who you were selling us out to. Matteo's hand shook, his gun darting between Lucien and Celine. Dom, listen to me. I knew you'd use the attack as a distraction to come down here and finish the job yourself, Lucien interrupted, his eyes devoid of any mercy. You let an enemy into my home. You threatened a child. It's over, Lucien! Vincenzo is breaching the main hall! Matteo screamed, raising his weapon to fire. Lucien didn't even flinch. He raised his arm and fired a single, deafening shot. The heavy bullet struck Matteo squarely in the chest, throwing the capo backward into a rack of wine. Hundreds of expensive bottles shattered, raining glass and dark red liquid over his lifeless body. The ringing in Celine's ears was unbearable. She dropped her makeshift weapon, collapsing to her knees as the adrenaline finally left her body. Lily rushed out of the panic room, throwing her arms around her mother's neck, sobbing into her shoulder. Lucien didn't look at Matteo's body. He immediately holstered his weapon and crossed the room, dropping to his knees beside Selene and Lily. His massive, bloodied hands gently framed Celine's face, his thumbs wiping away the tears streaming down her pale cheeks. Are you hurt? He demanded, his eyes frantically scanning her and Lily for injuries. Did he touch you? No, Selene choked out, leaning into his touch, the warmth of his hands grounding her in the nightmare. We're okay. Lucien, the front gates. His tactical radio, clipped to his belt, crackled to life with Silas's voice. Boss, it's done. The claymores on the driveway wiped out their heavy armor. Vincenzo was caught in the crossfire by the fountain. He's dead. The rest of his crew is surrendering. Lucien pressed a button on the radio. Secure the perimeter. No survivors from Vincenzo's inner circle. Send a medic down to the cellar for Leo. He let go of the radio and looked back at Celine. The storm outside was still raging, but inside the dark, shattered cellar, the war was over. Vincenzo's syndicate was broken, the traitor was dead, and Lucien's absolute grip on the city was secured. It's over, Lucien whispered, pulling both Celine and Lily into his chest. He buried his face in Celine's hair, breathing in the scent of her, realizing just how terrifyingly close he had come to losing a family he didn't even know he needed. Nobody will ever hurt you again. I swear it on my life. Selene closed her eyes, wrapping her arms tightly around the most dangerous man in Chicago. The city was ruthless, cold, and unforgiving. But as she held on to Lucien Russo, she finally felt something she hadn't felt in years. She felt safe. The heavy storm over Chicago finally broke, leaving behind a city forever changed by a child's courageous plea. Lucien Russo, once a man of cold steel, found his true empire not in the criminal underworld, but within the fierce love of a brilliant mother and daughter. Celine and Lily successfully survived the brutal Mafia war, stepping out of the shadows to become the untouchable, cherished heart of his new world.